someone who can, oh, there you go. You beat me to it. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We're going to be talking with Lezli Engelking today, who is a global cannabis and marijuana expert. She I just love her story and how she told me about this a few years ago, where she decided she was going to put together Focus, which sets and is involved with standards for clearly a very growing industry, not just in the United States, but around the world. I was able, and Lezli, I'm sure, has the correct numbers, but as I could tell right now, there's at least 20 states that have fully legalized marijuana, and 4 where it's still illegal. So don't live in Idaho, Wyoming, South Carolina, and I think that was Kansas there in the middle, where it's fully illegal. But that's been an evolution. It's also legal or close to fully legal in about 40 countries, I think. It's so evolving, and the way we describe legal is different. As I understand it, there's the bigger cannabis industry, and Lezli, please correct me as we go. I wanted to just kind of give at least what I thought was some sort of reality, that there's a cannabis industry, and that's everything from the cannabis plant. And then that has, as I understand it, CBD, which is cannabidiol. I'm a chemical engineer, so I'm not exactly sure what that chemical is, but as I understand it, in the cannabis plant, there's 113 different kinds of cannabinoid. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
It's okay. It takes a while to get used to.
Indeed.
And one of that 113 is THC, and that's the psychoactive part that everybody, or at least some people, want to make illegal. And I say the hell with them. But that's a whole nother story. This is more about the broader issue about the market and what the opportunities are. And Leslie's an expert in that area, so we thought we'd have her chat about that. Lezli, what did I get wrong there? And please, let's go through both the U.S. perspective and then those aspects of around the world that you'd like to share. Thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. Zooming in from your home in Colorado.
That's right. Thanks so much for having me. Let me just figure out the screen share and then I'll get going.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Maybe. Sorry, guys. Not sure what the problem is here.
We'll figure it out.
Okay, let's try it again.
You've got the share screen button at the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh, I see magic happening right before
Okay, there we go.
Beautiful.
That makes me feel a little bit better. All right, let me 1 second here. Now, did that change it out of, are you still seeing the?
Now we see your laptop screen, but just a minute ago we saw that there it is. That one is like the preview version.
Why am I in that?
Let's see. I think if you go into your PowerPoint, you should be able to go into a different version of it. So where you are now is not a good place, but the place you were a second ago was okay. Anybody a PowerPoint expert to know where she needs to hit from that screen?
Do you have 2 screens, Lezli?
Yeah.
So what's happening is it's picking up the fact you've got two screens and it's putting you into what's called presentation mode. So if you just click if you put your, if you go down to the bottom of the screen where the plus and minus is, next to that, you've got an icon next to that plus and minus down the bottom, which makes the size difference. See the plus and minus on the bottom right-hand side of your screen of that there. No, right. No, where you were before. There, no, left, go left to the next icon. No, left to the next icon. That's it, click that. Right, so what's happening is you've got two screens and it's picking up two screens and it's putting one of them
So
as
maybe
presentation mode. So unless you disconnect one of your screens, you won't be able to, it won't let you do what necessarily is a full screenshot.
okay.
It's unfortunately you've got two screens and then you try and do what's called share screening online.
Okay, let me just disconnect one of them.
It's called reader mode. It's an annoying feature I found about 2 weeks ago with the exact same thing, and I had to turn off one of my monitors, and then it realized there was only one output, and then it allowed you to do the full screen.
Yeah.
So everybody just lean back and take a toke and it'll all work out in the end.
But now I can't find the screen share. Okay, gosh, sorry. I thought I had this done before we started. Okay, now I think we're there.
And now if you click the icon from last time of just making it there, that should, if you've only got one, there you go, see?
You know, sometimes magic happens. That looks great, Leslie.
Okay, but I can't see my notes now, so I got to figure that out.
Ah, right, yeah. So your notes are on the presentation at the bottom?
No, they were on a different document, but.
Well, you can also.
Let's just go. I don't think I need notes, and if I do, I'll come find them after. Okay, so sorry about all of that confusion, and thanks again, Doug, for having me. Totally appreciate it. I'm Lezli Engelking. I'm the founder of Focus, which is an international cannabis health and safety organization. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, just so you can kind of understand how I got here and where my expertise comes from. So I started my early career in public health in the mental health sector. I was arguing for parity in healthcare and mental health and physical health. And through that work, I met the folks at Eli Lilly and Company. I spent 13 years there. And when I left there in 2010, Arizona had legalized cannabis for medical use. Some friends wanted to apply for a license, and I knew nothing about it. I was so mortified that I was going to go to jail. I was worried about, what my family would think. My dad's a defense attorney, but eventually they wore me down with data, and we applied for and won the first license in Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm from. I was executive director there for about 3 years, and everything in Arizona in cannabis is vertically integrated. So one license allows you to cover the full supply chain. So we started with a cultivation facility and one dispensary, but in the 2.5 years that I were there, we ended up building an infused products kitchen, manufacturing labs, distribution companies, additional cultivation. So we had like 6 different retail facilities, 2 cultivations. We grew super fast. It was sort of a dream come true as far as a new business goes, but also a little bit of a nightmare because it was a lot more than we were ready for. And we just kept going as fast as we could. I really fell in love with the industry, the plant, coming out of pharma and working in that space with physicians. I was there because I really like to help people and seeing people lead better lives. This felt so much more real to me. It felt very holistic, and I was literally seeing people every day telling me about their incredible experiences. The other thing I really liked about it was the community spirit. So the industry itself brings with it, and this comes a little bit out of the legacy, but also today too. a really community spirit, give back, participate, help others, lots of different volunteer work, fundraisers. It just was great. But like I said, it was kind of a nightmare too. We had every problem you could possibly have, and we had them more than once. And this is really where I started to get the feeling for focus and knowing that something better had to happen. So I'll give you just a quick example. White flies are typical in cannabis cultivation and indoor. And so in one of our many different rooms in the cultivation facility, we had a wholesale room that came down with white flies. And it's not tragic. I mean, that crop, that harvest has to go and be destroyed and you start off over, but it's not that weird either. So we went about our normal procedures. We got rid of all those plants, we cleaned the room, disinfected everything. We brought in new clones, put them in, and within 2 or 3 days, there's white flies all over them again. So we do the whole process again. Same thing happens. Well, finally, on the 3rd time, we realized, oh, wow, nobody thought to clean the air vents. And so these flies were just coming back down. Well, we didn't have anything written down. There was no standard operating procedure or a policy for what happens when you get a pest infestation. And so these are the kind of things that would happen repeatedly. We were in Arizona, it was summer. We had our AC units go out with the power loss. Didn't have a backup plan, didn't have anybody on call, and lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there's a lot of different things that we were learning the hard way that were costing us. So even though we were growing, it was painful growth. And what I came to realize through that is that cannabis regulations really are about who can sell it, who can buy it, when they can buy it. So who, what, when, where, why, what they can use it for. Their regulations, they're very specific, but they came from the states, not the federal government, because it's still federally illegal in the US. And states aren't typically responsible for developing new regulatory structures, right? In the US, they typically implement federal programs at the state level, and sometimes they're the same as everybody else's, or they have their own state kind of twist. But in cannabis, because it's federally illegal, the states had to write the rules for this. And so what we got were very specific regulatory rules without any guidance for operators. The other part of the rules is that they were very driven on testing. So heavy reliance on testing products. And I come from pharmaceutical industry before this, and we learned a lot about quality management and operational efficiencies and lean manufacturing. And one of the things we know is that by the time you test a product, that quality is either there or it's not. And so what's been happening in cannabis in the US, because of this heavy reliance on testing without any guidance and insight for industry, is it's like Groundhog Day every day. So like if you're a small cultivator and you can only grow 3 harvests a year, and you grow your harvest and you're following all the regs, and you take it to this third party and you spend the however much, a couple $1,000s to get it tested, and it comes back bad, what are you going to do? That's 1/3 of your revenue for the year, right? And there are certain things and practices that have come about more because of these problems and failures. So we see folks remediating and irradiating cannabis, doing a lot of people will just grow for manufacturing and processing oil into oils because they have a hard time growing it clean. So it was all this kind of recognition that the operators were struggling. And it wasn't just me. At that time, the community was much smaller, but still growing very quickly. And every operator that I talked to around the country was having the same issues. And so that was really like the impetus for me to start Focus. I'm a public health advocate, and testing still leaves lots of opportunities for unsafe products to be on the market. And if you look at other industries like food or pharmaceuticals or anything, the testing is done in-house. Third-party testing is done as a verification or a validation step. It's not the only type of testing. And I think that's really one of the challenges. So that was the reason I started Focus. And again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit health and safety organization. We have no financial stake or funding from the cannabis industry. Our mission, you can see here, is protecting public health, consumer safety, and the environment. And the goal in starting Focus was to write standards for the industry that would help guide them and help better protect public health and safety. And so we did that in 2014. When I launched, we got together about 300 experts, all different stakeholder groups. And this is one of the requirements for developing international ISO type standards, is you need to consult with every different stakeholder group. We had 8 committees that built standards for all different aspects of the supply chain. It took us about 2.5 years. We did not recreate the wheel when we wrote standards. My feeling was and still is that we need to find a way for cannabis to integrate with existing regulatory structures and systems and programs. And there's no reason to go backwards in everything that we've learned in food safety and pharmaceutical manufacturing and everything else. And so rather than creating something from scratch, we used US Code of Federal regulations for food, for pharma, for supplements, for ag. We looked at the Food Safety Modernization Act. We looked at World Health and World Trade Organization guidelines, so GMP, GAP, GACP. We looked at the Occupational Health and Safety guidelines. We looked at ISO standards, all the different series. And then looked at global cannabis regulations from around the world. And the committees met weekly, and they would just go through one section of these big, huge documents we gave them, and they would just decide what to either add, remove, or change to make it specific to the needs and nomenclature of the cannabis industry. So the standards that we built are management system standards. So it's typical ISO 9001 type standard. So they cover everything from how you hire and train your employees, to how you maintain your facilities, to how you partner with people, to how you get rid of waste. They're very, very comprehensive. I think our cultivation standard is something like 50 pages. But when you see it, it looks just like what you're used to from another industry. So if you've worked in environmental health, or you worked in food or pharmaceuticals or ag, you're used to these type of standards. We provide additional services, and I don't mean this to be a sales pitch as much as to try and give you an idea of where I've gotten some of the information that I have. So we provide both public and private sector solutions. And over the last almost 10 years now, we've worked in 31 states across the US and 14 countries. And that varies from helping a single operator to helping set up a whole regulatory program in a country, to helping a regulatory program assess itself for improvement and looking for gaps and challenges. So we sort of do it all. And this is the general feeling around the world about cannabis still. So even though we see everything in the news, it is not nearly like what what you hear in the news. It's moving fast. It is growing at a tremendous rate, but there's still a lot of stigma and fear out there. And that's you'll see that. I think part of the reason and the challenges that we're seeing in cannabis programs around the world are because folks are having trouble regulating it. So cannabis is like the human body. There's lots of different ways to use cannabis, right? So it can be medical use, but it could also just be used recreationally for sleep or anxiety or fun. But we can also make things with it, right? There's all the agricultural uses and industrial uses. And it's really important that whatever regulatory structure is built for cannabis, that it considers all those. It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be so much stigma. It's just like corn, right? I mean, we regulate corn and it grows in the field, and before it's harvested and up until that time, it's regulated by USDA. And then it gets manufactured and put into multiple different forms and products. And depending on that output is how it gets regulated, right? So if it's going to be ethanol and fuel, it's going to go through EPA. but if it's going to be cosmetics, it's going to go through FDA. And that's really where we are with cannabis too. And I think some of the challenges around the world, the legalization has started with medical and then moved to adult use. And nobody's really taken a chance to step back and go, but holistically, where do we need to be eventually, right? It usually starts, a lot of times in the US, these programs started with voter initiatives. So the legislature and the regulatory community would be pushed into doing that. That's not so true around the world. Most of the time, the governments are doing that now. So these are some of the considerations that if we're going to go into a country and talk to them about starting a new program or cleaning up a program that exists, these are all the different things. And there's a lot to consider there. So it's really different if I go in and work in Morocco and help them set up a cannabis program because of their cultural background, their belief systems, their illicit market, right? They've been growing hash for hundreds and hundreds of years and selling it around the world. And I think today, if I remember correctly, it's about 60% of the world's hash is still produced in this northern region in Morocco. But so it's going to be different to go in, and the goals of the program need to be different because they really need to align with that community and what type of benefit they're trying to bring from the programs. So this is the US, and the dark green, and this is actually current as of a week ago, I think. So the dark green is full legalization for adult use. The lighter green, or bright green, sorry, these are medical. And then the light green is low THC or a CBD type program. And I think that's one of the things I should kind of stop here and explain a little bit. In the US, we have medical cannabis, we have medical marijuana, we have hemp. Around the world, it's pretty much just referred to as cannabis, but typically what they're talking about is what the US refers to as hemp. And this is where some of the confusion lies too. And it's certainly happening in the US. And it's really, the plant is the same. The cannabis plant is all the same plant. It's really a regulatory definition that is determining what this is. And so in my personal opinion, I think we'll get to the point where this is not the case, where everything will just be cannabis, but we're not even close to that yet. Like I said before on the psycho picture with cannabis, people are still afraid of this, even though we're moving forward. Even in states and countries that have moved forward, when you end up talking to the regulators and the folks overseeing and developing these programs, you'll hear their stigma, you'll hear their fears that are still there. It's not intentional for sure, and they're doing the best they can, but we're coming out of decades and decades of global prohibition. So it's going to take a while to change. So Uruguay was legalized for adult use in 2013. This was a sort of unique situation because other countries had gone to medical before, but they actually went straight in with adult use. Didn't really do much licensing until about 2014. And what they allowed was like personal use and growing, some cultivation clubs or compassion clubs, and then dispensaries. And then in 2017, they actually started licensing businesses. And I believe to date, there are 3 licensed producers in Uruguay. So it isn't as big of a market as you see, and it's still illegal inside the country. So the whole entire market is for export purposes. And I think that's a unique and interesting thing to understand too. When we talk about legalization, it's not the same as decriminalization, right? And so in Uruguay, they legalized cannabis for adult use, but they did not decriminalize the use of it. And that it becomes this very big sort of chicken and the egg, because this is why we still have people in jail for cannabis use and other people making millions of dollars in their businesses off of it, right? And so there's a fix that needs to happen there globally too. Canada, originally there was the first medical cannabis law, I think in Canada was 2001. but it isn't anything that anybody knew about, and it was very brief. In 2014, they had their cannabis medical program start. It actually came because of a court decision. So it wasn't the government saying, woohoo, we want to legalize cannabis. It was, we're forced to do this. Health Canada had to establish a different department to oversee the regulations. In 2018, they moved to an adult use market. Overall, it's a huge market for a country of that size. It's struggling like many of the more mature markets, like the US, like Canada. It's become quite clear over the last couple of years, as we've been, close to a decade or a little longer with these different programs, that the regulatory structures that were built, not necessarily in the US, but anywhere, don't necessarily take into consideration the laws of supply and demand and economics. And so what we've seen is these very, very restrictive regulatory regimes that make compliance uber difficult. I mean, it's a full-time job, and a lot of these companies, especially in the early days, didn't have a lot of background. And so in Canada, just like in the US, we saw a lot of companies get lots of investment money, start huge companies. They're all across the country, but they didn't do it smartly. They built their business based on these regulatory structures that were limited, and they had a big share of that market. But now that there's more competition, people are having to actually look at competing. And so this is not, like I said, specific to Canada, but the markets are struggling. There's a lot of compression happening. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening. And so it's important to understand that most of these markets that exist today are probably going to go through something similar. Not exactly the same. I mean, it's certainly with 3 licenses in Uruguay, you're not going to see the same thing happen like what happened in Canada. But it's a common theme about sort of over-regulated and overtaxed. I did a presentation earlier, actually this was late last year, but for an oil and gas industry trade association. And I was up on stage with these 3 big Texas oil guys that are, doing all this. And they literally started the conversation and they go, you see that lady? Her industry is even more regulated than ours. So there's lots of regulations in cannabis. Australia legalized for medical in 2016. It is a very medical program, goes through pharmacies and physicians, and it's all tracked pretty closely. They have recently, the Green Party has decided and launched an initiative for an adult use this year. It's not clear if it will go through or not, but they are looking to do an import-export adult use market. Australian market's doing well, considering, I would say considering compared to a lot of others. It's not as huge as a Canadian market, but their regulatory structure seems to be a bit better. There's a lot more import and export happening from there. Germany is an interesting one because just of their proximity in the EU and because of their history of being Germany, I guess. So they legalized in 2017 for medical, and were planning on, for the last year or so, had this big campaign about how they were going to legalize for adult use, and it was so exciting. And then a lot of that media attention and some of the attention from the European Union just kind of scared them off. And so the regulators in Germany have come back and said, okay, well, scratch that. We're not legalizing all this in 2023. We're going to go forward, and we're going to, first of all, give the option to the states within the country so that they can either opt in or opt out. And I think there's 7 regions, if I recall correctly. Which is problematic. We've seen that across the US in states where they give local jurisdictions the option to opt in or opt out. And when they opt out, it is, they can't have any cannabis there, but it doesn't really work if you're trying to provide access to cannabis for medical patients. how can you not have access in a certain thing? The other thing is it causes a lot of problems within the marketplace because there's still such a huge illicit market. And that is one of the things to understand in a lot of the mature markets in the US. We're seeing the illicit market grow faster than the legal market, despite the fact that states are sort of knocking down these laws every day. We're still seeing the illicit market grow. And a lot of that is thought to have to do with the heavy regulatory burden as well as the tax structure. So in the US, we still have a tax law on our books from Al Capone days that say you can't take any deductions if you're federally illegal business. And so these cannabis companies can't take any tax deductions. And then the states also are putting in very high tax rates. And so you see too high of prices, too much struggle in the industry, and then the illicit market grows. So Germany will be an interesting one to watch to see what happens. This is all real recent in the last week or so that they've sort of pulled back on this. And the conversations I was having with some of my colleagues in the EU yesterday, they were quite convinced that it would be at least 7 more years before this actually takes any kind of real shape in Germany. I certainly am not saying that that's fact, but it is interesting to hear from people like that. We can go from something being done in a year to something being done in 8 years, and delays like that are not uncommon. So if you're planning to start a business, it's something to make sure that you're aware of and can budget for and know that you're able to maintain. I mentioned Morocco earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time on here again, but they passed a law in 2021, and the intent of the law was to bring economic development to that northern region in Morocco. It's called the Rif. And the families up there, because they've been selling, growing cannabis and producing hash and selling it around the world, haven't been able to, they haven't had any subsidies or infrastructure assistance from the government. So there's, I think they said 700 families up in this region that they have built all their own schools, their own roads, their water systems, and have been completely excluded. And so the idea was to bring some economic development to that region, and then utilize their expertise to export globally. The law itself is going fairly slow. And it's a little bit wonky right now, to be honest. They're not quite there yet. They're sort of still in the middle, but they're implementing anyway. So you can get licenses to cultivate, but the pharma companies can import seeds and seedlings, and then they can give them to a farmer to grow, and then the farmer gives them their output, and then they can make products with it. But at this point, they can't export it, and they can't sell it within the country. So they're sort of waiting for this to happen, and that's not unusual in a lot of different countries. Morocco's an interesting one as well, because it's 9 miles across at the shortest point to Spain, which has had cannabis clubs for decades, and Portugal, which has completely legalized all drugs for way more than a decade now. So again, the geography, topography, connectivity of the world comes into play here a lot too with cannabis. Thailand is an interesting one. So in 2022, the health department for Thailand said they were going to make Thailand the medical cannabis hub of the world. And so they legalized it, but did not decriminalize it, and have not put a formal regulatory program in place. And so I just read this week that there's already this huge problem with illicit out of the country oversupply in Thailand. So even though they're not legally allowed to have dispensaries or corner shops and whatnot, they do. But more often than not, these operators are already complaining about being overrun by illicit US supply or Mexico supply, any of that kind of thing. So there is some talk that this will be cleaned up in the next month or two. So it'll be very interesting to watch. But I think that's one sort of cautionary tale about cannabis business is you got to be so in touch with these regulations. It's a do or die thing, and they change all the time. And that's not just a US thing, that is country to country too. So it's important to keep up with that, or have somebody that you can count on to do that for you. I wanted to just mention that I think it's important that we realize that the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs under the United Nations is still in place. And despite 40 plus countries going through this process, the UN there's still a conflict in those laws. And so this is something that is having to get worked out. It might be part of the reason that Germany pulled back. We don't know. We know the EU gave them some grief about their stuff, but so there are some international treaties and laws that need to be cleaned up yet. And I think that, in my personal opinion, just having spent some time at the UN and the World Health Organization and worked on this stuff for a long time, that once that is cleaned up, this all becomes much clearer for everybody. When that will be, I don't know. But ultimately, what we need, regardless of the country, is a federal regulatory framework that looks at cannabis for all of the different pathways that it can be. So if it is industrial and it's going to be fabrics and building materials, if it's pharmaceutical and it's going to be like an Epidiolex that has to have an FDA approval, or is it going to be food and beverages like a CPG, or is it going to be these state programs like we have in the US with dispensaries? We have to consider all those pathways. The genie is out of the bottle with cannabis, and these are the pathways that are already there. So it's our job as the regulatory community, but also as the business community, to help the governments around the world sort of see this and move towards a more effective model that will allow for a global supply chain that works cohesively, much better than what it does today. That was my presentation. There's our contact information if you're interested. We are happy to provide free copies of the standards. We also are happy to talk about business opportunities around the world if you want to reach out or go through the website. And I'm happy to take any questions that we have.
Extraordinary. Great information. I'm going to open up the floor to questions if you would either raise your hand or unmute yourself. Before we do that, though, I'd love to hear Farad Darver coming in. He's the CEO of Healthcare International Research. What reactions do you have to what Lezli has spoken about here? And are there some additional perspectives you'd like to add from the UK?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, what Lezli said was absolutely bang on, and really, really interesting. It's a very, very technically difficult terrain to navigate through. And what the most important thing that Lezli said was the ever-changing landscape with regards to regulatory compliance. I was literally only in Thailand 2 weeks ago. And whilst exactly as Lezli said there, whilst it was all these shops have popped up, they haven't actually decriminalized it. So it's a bit of a weird one. I mean, they are, and I'm not joking with you, they are everywhere. Every fourth or fifth shop is a cannabis shop. Now, we're being recorded here, so there are things I won't say, but there are reasons as to why that's happened, and those in the industry would understand. A lot of this has to do with basically internal politics of the country. Mm-hmm. There's no lie in stating that, simply put, the Doug, I think, have you taken over the yeah, okay, sorry. There's every country has its own reasons for allowing or not allowing it, and there's an element of, because the plant is so robust, because it can grow anywhere and be grown by anyone, it's hard to legislate the tax. How does the government make money from something that can be easily grown, easily manufactured, and easily sold? And until governments really do figure out how and why and what they want to do, we're always going to have this issue. So I think there's an element that is that's always going to be the way it is, and there won't be any unified world or federal in the US or EU here, nothing, because each country has its own reasons as to why they legislate the way they do with the plant. So, you know, that's, but in saying with that, I think it's very difficult to call the cannabis industry the cannabis industry. It's owning industry that is so big, they have industries amongst industries within it. You know, we specialize in CBD, you know, which you mentioned previously. Out of the, you know, there's 100, you know, there's a couple of thousand chemical components to the hemp and cannabis plants, or the cannabis sativa plants. As Lezli said, you've got the cannabis sativa plant has, you know, the marijuana plant and the hemp plant, generally differentiated by the amount of THC within it. So, and again, that's a US thing, mainly used for legislative reasons, that they know that if you talk about hemp, it means it's got roughly about 0.3% or less of THC, and if it's not, then it's the t'other. And the thing is that business in itself, you know, the CBD industry is an industry in itself, multi-billion-pound industry. With inside that, you've got ingestible and you've got cosmetic. Both of them, again, billion-pound, billion-dollar industries within industries that. So it's extremely hard to put an umbrella over all of it. The one thing that a lot of people think that they can do is to get into this industry very easy and make some quick bucks. And you can to a certain extent, but that's what happened 8 years ago in the farming of it in the US. And that's why the bubble burst, because there were so many people that farmed it, then they couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't sell it. And because federally you weren't allowed to cross states and cross the borders, then you were stuck with it. And it was like, what do we do? That then drove the price so down. So there's still massive misunderstanding. And I think, I mean, for instance, what Leslie's doing is for the whole kind of what you know, everything that comes under cannabis, of which CBD obviously does come under the cannabis umbrella. It's extremely interesting, but a lot of the problems that Lezli faces in the US are faced but here in Europe. The difference really between us as you know, heads of our specific companies is we have, and what Healthcare International Research does is specifically with CBD and CBG and certain cannabinoids, and that's because what we do is to do with topical, and that's purely a business reason. Our scientific expertise lies solely in the science of CBD and topicals. But worldwide, you know, when you've got a plant that's so easily grown, that's so easily available, that can be utilized to make clothes, cement, houses, you know, as well as used to alleviate pains and aches because of its anti-inflammatory properties, because of it being able to alleviate psychoactive, personalized psychoactive psychotropic issues, such as split personality syndrome, etc., etc. So when that all comes from one plant that has so many, you know, any government's going to go, well, hold on, how do we make money out of this? You know, how do we regulate this? And that's the issue, because it is such a fantastic plant at its natural source to be able to utilize. It's very, very difficult to regulate, because, you know, if it does all those different things, I mean, you know, that's like having a car that, you know, can act like a microwave, but at the same time can hoover your house. I mean, where does it stop, you know? And that's just down purely based to the utilization, which is so varied and wide of it.
You're also alluding to the fact that there's a pharmaceutical industry that is threatened, you know, by this.
And tobacco and alcohol and the prison systems. There are so many industries that are threatened by this.
And there's such a misunderstanding with it as well. The amount of times I receive emails or phone calls or people that are asking for my opinion on wanting to make a CBD alcoholic beverage. And I'm just like, you obviously don't know what CBD does, because it's an anti-inflammatory. So you'll have to drink more to get drunk, which is bad for you. so they don't even understand how it works. You know, you can't infuse CBD with alcohol, but they're, you know, so there's such a huge misunderstanding in how this works. And you've got these industries that generally are, if you've got a pharmaceutical drug that you take and you want people to take because it stops aches and pains, and then you have a topical that you rub in that does the same thing. That's, now I'm not anti-pharma. In fact, quite the opposite. I believe that we should work together. I believe that there needs to be a conversation with pharma, conversation with tobacco and alcohol. There needs to be a joint conversation of, we're not saying yes, we're not saying no, we're saying together. There are ways that this can be utilized to make it more beneficial for the end user. But until those conversations happen, I feel that there is going to be an element of where it's us and them. And I really don't see that, because you know what? At the end of the day, if you're in a bad accident and you need some heavy pharmaceutical based medicines, you know, rubbing a cream on that's got some CBD in it is not going to help, nor is smoking it. You know, there's a time and a place. I just think that there's got to be an inclusive conversation between those industries to benefit the consumer. But until that happens, you're going to get these opposing views.
So Lezli, there's a lot to unpack there. Wonder your reaction, and also any comments about the UK. And the other question I would have is, overall, progress is being made, right? I mean, there are more states, there are more countries, there are more products that are being allowed in generally, right? Other than, you know, some backstepping along the way, but generally there's progress. The issue, I guess, is the level of complexity, and, you know, it's probably not happening as fast as it could or should be because of these regulations that you bring. What comments do you have on what Farad said?
Yeah, I'm like clapping and nodding the whole time at everything that you said. I'm in such agreement, especially about it really being about the benefit to humans, wherever you are in the world, right? I mean, if we've got a plant that is much safer than taking pills for certain things, why wouldn't we want folks to do that, right? And I'm a firm believer that we need pharma too. It is not one or the other, it is everybody together. But I think, yeah, and progress is being made. And I know I always feel like I'm a little bit of a Debbie Downer when I'm talking about this stuff, because I'm very pragmatic about it. But I felt like if I'm giving a presentation to folks about marketplace issue or opportunities, issues, whatever, that it's important to talk about the realities on the ground, because I think, and Fred alluded to this too, like people come into this with this idea that they're going to make buku bucks, and, you know, they've got green dollar signs in their eyes or whatever it is. And some do, just like any new industry. But the reality is that it's harder than most people think. And you really, the biggest mistake I see made, regardless of country, regardless of type of industry, regardless of type of operator, is a really lack of effective planning. So they're so excited that they go fast. And it's like, you got to go slow to go fast, right? You need to build the systems and then work the systems. And that's not what's happening at the operator level for, you know, businesses. It's not what's happening on the legislative level, and it's certainly not what's happening on the regulatory level. So it's a common thing. And I don't really have a lot to add about the UK. I mean, I know quite a bit about it, but I don't think I'm not the expert on this call for that, for sure. And I'm not sure really what else I would have to add about it.
You always provide amazing perspectives, and you're the first person ever, I think, at Global Chamber to show a picture of Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who
Really?
I met. I
He's
actually
my
went
hero.
through a training. Me too. I went through a whole training, 1 week of training every day with Dr. W. Edwards Deming in 1985, clearly before he passed away, but not
So
much
jealous.
before.
He's a
And
pretty
he is
incredible guy.
really
The
the
big thing
Toyota
about this,
production
Doug, if I
system
can
is
jump
based
in,
on everything he's done. So amazing.
Education. Education is absolutely critical.
And that's what I'm taking away from this whole perspective from both of you is that, and so what would you recommend based on all of this for somebody either coming into the industry or someone who already has their toe in the industry in terms of what to do next? Clearly, Lezli, I think what I hear you saying is process and, have a plan and come into it with your eyes open, but then do some planning. What would your advice be? And also kind of weave in, where do you see the opportunities in the next 5 years?
So I think the opportunities, that's an easier, kind of quicker way to do that. But the opportunities are huge. So regardless of all these struggles and the different challenges in different countries and whatnot, this is a huge industry that touches everybody. And whether you have anything to do with cannabis today in your life or not, you will soon. Not because you're necessarily going to become a cannabis user, but because so many people are, and it's happening. And there's just so many different uses for it. So I think that is, I lost my train of thought, Doug, sorry.
Well, you were talking about the opportunity.
So, but I think, I think the companies that are going to win in my mind right now are the ones that are setting up really solid foundations where they are, whether that's in a country or a state. They're understanding inside and out their regulatory structures. They're understanding the regulatory structures and trade agreements for the countries that they want to work in and partner with. And they're establishing really good, trusting relationships so that when this does really open up, they're going to have a global supply chain that's already in place that they can go and win, and they can do it cheaper and faster than a lot of these companies will be able to. So that's where I really highlight this sort of planning, like take the time up front, pay somebody who knows about this stuff for an hour or two of consulting, ask your questions, make sure that you're thinking not just getting your license, but what are you going to do after it? This is not what's happening in the next quarter or the next year. It's what's happening in 3 to 5 years. It's amazing how fast time goes in this space because it changes every day. So what every day feels new. And it's like, oh, wow, all of a sudden I've been doing this almost a decade at Focus and I've been in the industry for 15 years. That's insane.
You mentioned about a global supply chain. When does that happen? I mean, why are we growing the plant in Canada when it should be grown in Ghana, as an example, or someplace that makes, that can't really be done right now, right? But when do we get to that point? Is it 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 years?
The one thing I've never done in my whole time in this space is made predictions, because I don't think that they're worth the time to say them. Nobody knows. And I thought at one point it was going to be by now. And then, but for the most of my career, I thought, yeah, it's not going to be like, we're not even going to get anywhere in the US till at least 2030. And then it's going to be probably a 5 to 7 year transition. So we're talking close to 240. I don't know. I just don't make predictions because it's just, there's more research being done on cannabis now. So one of the things is that research has been stymied for so long because of the global prohibition, especially in the US, not necessarily as much around the world, but still not as much as we see research on other things. And most of the research was geared towards looking at the negative outcomes and what, the dangers of cannabis. So now that research is opening up, I think that is the big sort of bubble in the air, right? Because what if we find some crazy data that shows that if you take cannabis, it cures your cancer? I'm not saying it does, please don't get me wrong, but there could be something like that. This is a miraculous plant that we're learning more and more about every day. And so to me, that's the biggest what if in this space, because if there's some data that comes out that is just too good to pass up, nobody's going to not do that. You know what I mean? Like the people will get on board. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it. I don't know if that helps, but.
Fantastic. I'd like to thank some of the visitors that we have here. Farhad, thank you for your perspective. Any closing comment, Farhad, that you would like to make?
Nothing more than what Lezli has said in regards to the education piece. When you said just now about the global, like the UK is the biggest exporter of medical cannabis in the world, right? There's like 300 odd tons a year that we do for, so and you wouldn't have thought that from the UK, but so there's different rules. The main thing really I would say for anyone who's getting involved is the cannabis industry is more than growing plants. It inculcates everything from cosmetics to food, to beverages, to, as I said, clothes, whatever. It's all under, and you've got to decide what it is that you want to do within that, you know. And then once you've decided what it is that you want to do, like Lezli said, it's then actually seek guidance from professional. You know, everything that Lezli said with regulatory compliance, et cetera. Doug, I think you've known me for just over about a year now, and I harp on about regulatory compliance all the time. And that's because that's where you have to base the foundations of any decent, legit, good company in whatever industry you're in, is in the compliance and how you're held to account. The other thing I'll close on is education. You know, the reason why you get the cannabis stigma is because people don't understand. Now, this plant has been around for thousands of years and is used in the West, you know, in the East massively. We always know that. But a lot of people don't understand where it comes from. They have no idea about the endocannabinoid system of the human body. They have no idea that we are designed by nature to absorb cannabinoids, that our mother's breast milk and colostrum contains that. It's the first things you have. It's the reason why it works so well. And when your body's reintroduced to it, because of years of prohibition, it knows what to do on a molecular level. These are all things that people do not understand. And when you explain this to individuals, the stigma starts to alleviate.
Yep.
And when, you know, when people who are anti-cannabis, you ask them, have you ever taken a pill to ease your pain? And they say, well, yeah, I've taken diazepam, or I've taken cocodamol or diclofenac. And you say, you do realize that that comes from the same plant that makes heroin. That doesn't mean that you're a drug dealer or a drug addict. So it's about understanding the parts of the plant that are utilized for what it is they want to do. So education is a huge part of this. And that's why the likes of what Leslie's doing and what I do with white papers and it's all to try and do this educational piece that informs the leadership of global economies and decision makers over how and what they can utilize it for.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing, Doug?
Well, yeah, love to hear your final comments.
We didn't talk about
we'll
this, and this is why one of the things that I find so fascinating and impressive about this plant, and it's never really talked about in a commercial or business type setting, is the potential for this to help solve or relieve global hunger. So just through the use of hemp hearts and hemp seeds, which are legal everywhere, so there's no issue with that. We, you know, think about, we go and drop bottles of, you know, cases of water and rice on the ground in countries all over the world. What if we dropped hemp hearts? They've got protein, they've got nutrients, they've got vitamins and minerals. They won't break apart. They're plentiful. It grows super fast. So don't limit your thinking on this. I think there's so much good to be done in the world through this plant if we can get there.
Amazing. Lezli Engelking, thank you so much for sharing your information today. Thank you, Farard. Thank you all for attending today. And we've got some really fun folks in the audience. If any of you are interested in connecting with Lezli and Farard, and you haven't figured out how to do that yet, either through LinkedIn or through email or through Leslie's presentation, please let us know at info@globalchamber.org, and we'll be happy to connect you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Lezli, you are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate the opportunity.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.